Namaskar, and welcome to the Ekam series of Gita on the Go. Over the last 6 episodes, we've actually covered chapter 1 to chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita. We've spoken about the broad themes that have existed in each of those chapters. But even before that, when we had spoken about the Bhagavad Gita, we had spoken about the structure of the Bhagavad Gita, existing in 3 parts. These 3 parts linked to the Mahavakya of Tat Tvam Asi were actually focusing on one of each across 6 chapters. It is thus that the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita focus on understanding the idea of Tvam, that shift which starts from Koham, who am I, and attempts to answer it, attempts to connect you with your own self, and ends with Soham, thus I am. In these 6 chapters, of which today we will bring together all the learnings, all the frameworks, all the concepts, all the thoughts that we've had, and bring them together in this summary episode for Tvam, chapter 1 to 6 of the Bhagavad Gita. In the first chapter, Bhagwan Shri Krishna speaks to Arjuna and addresses his concerns. And even before he does that, we are provided the context of Dhritarashtra talking to Sanjay. The entire commentary of the Bhagavad Gita is actually in Sanjay's voice. He is the one who's seeing what's happening on the battlefield and relating that back to Dhritarashtra. Therefore, we see that the first chapter starts and exists in 3 parts, starting with the first part where the context is laid out. What's important for us to understand in this part is that Arjuna is feeling fear. When he looks at the context of that whole battlefield, and Bhagwan Shri Krishna insists that he be taken right to the center of the battlefield. If the Bhagavad Gita or the learning of Arjuna or the transformation of Arjuna didn't need to happen, Bhagwan Shri Krishna could have very easily driven him to one corner of the battlefield where these questions, the fear, the terror that he subsequently speaks of would not have arisen in Arjuna at all. So the first part of first chapter is just about setting the context, about Arjuna in the battlefield, divided and at war with his nearest, dearest loved ones against a very formidable enemy force. And therefore, what Bhagwan Sri Krishna drives through that for us is how each of us in our lives is actually existing at a battlefield. Our workplaces, our homes, and that's how we view our lives. In fact, in our workplaces, the terminology, the parlance, the vocabulary, the glossary that we use itself is that of battle. We create the battles in our own minds, and we are most at battle with or most at war with those that are nearest to us. And that is what we see reflected in the context that Bhagwan Shri Krishna sets for Arjuna and Sanjay describes to Dhritarashtra in the first part of chapter 1 of the Bhagavad Gita. This chapter is called the Arjuna Vishada Yoga, so literally translated as the sorrows and the griefs of Arjuna. And therefore it is that the second part of this chapter focuses on Arjuna's fears. It focuses on Arjuna's awareness of what's happening in his body and his mind. Why this is important is because we need to be aware of what's happening in our body and the mind. Very often we confuse our fears, which is what's happening in our emotion, with something that's external. None of it is ever external. And that's what's important to address and understand as Arjuna talks about his fears and talks about what's happening. And Arjuna is, by the way, a very skilled warrior, so he's the best of all of us. And so in order to be even with that one who is the best of all of us, he has that intellectual, rational discrimination to understand the difference between what's happening to the body as a result of what's happening in his mind. And then from there is that third level, which all of us are very tempted with. And again, in our daily lives, the third part of chapter 1 of the Arjuna Vishada Yoga actually talks about Arjuna wanting to just desert the battlefield and run away from what's happening. He does not want to face this battle that he sees before him. Translated in our daily lives, this is us at our workplaces, at homes, with our family members, with our teams, not wanting to take on some battles. We like to believe, because that's a convenient excuse for ourselves, that we like to believe that the reason we don't want to enter at battle is because these are our loved ones. How can we hurt them? But actually, that's not the reason. We think that running away from that battle, running away from that issue, that confrontation, that battle, by the way, which we've created, we've decided that we are at war with you. We've decided that in order for me to be right, you need to be wrong. These are all this is happening in our own minds. And we think that by running away from the situation, we would have resolved what's happening in our mind. And that's exactly what Arjun says. And by the way, we love to also call it bravery. We have a whole celebration of how discretion is the better part of valor. But that, as Bhagavan Shri Krishna says, and forces Arjun to think about, to become aware of, to take cognizance of, to act on, is indeed the battlefield of Kurukshetra that all of us face. With this context set of the Arjun Vishada Yoga, the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is called the Sankhya Yoga. Now, there are two meanings around this. One, of course, we're familiar with the Sankhya Yoga of Muni Kapila, which talks about the Purusha and the Prakriti principle. Well, this is called Sankhya Yoga, but this is the Sankhya Yoga of the Bhagavad Gita, and literally translated from Sankhya, from counting. So what chapter 2 does, like any good text, is provides us the summary of everything that's going to happen from chapter 3 to chapter 18. So literally translated, Sankhya Yoga is enumeration of principles. What that means is that all the principles that have been spoken of from chapter 3 to chapter 18 are aphoristically covered in chapter 2. So that really is the big broad summary chapter. If you don't read any of the Bhagavad Gita, read chapter 2, you'll at least know what's happening in there. From the Sankhya Yoga, and Sankhya Yoga has a lot of concepts that it talks about, we've picked up 3 concepts, primarily because they are a recurring theme through and through, and they are very relevant for this discussion on uncovering the Tvama, who you are, the shift from Koham to Soham. So literally translated, this is the enumeration of the principles that exist across all of the Bhagavad Gita from chapter 3 to chapter 18. There are 3 principles that we have specifically selected, or 3 principles that we would like to highlight with Sankhya Yoga, primarily not because the other principles are important, but primarily because these are recurring themes across all of the Bhagavad Gita, but specifically across chapter 1 to chapter 6, as we help in the decoding of the Tvama, as we make that shift from the Koham to the Soham. The first of these is actually the concept of the surrender of the ego. And why it is so powerful, especially in the context of the Bhagavad Gita, is because Bhagavan Shri Krishna actually tells Arjun that you are terrified, you're afraid, you think you want to run away from this battle, all that is fine. But if you really want to learn, if you want to become the best version of yourself, if you want to really rise beyond the Arjun that you are, to the Arjun that you could possibly be the best version of, the first thing you need to do is surrender your ego, because nothing comes in if you're filled with ego. Your cup needs to be empty. We spoke about this in the context of Zen koans. We spoke about them in the context of our personal experiences, of how we've grown and learned only when we became emptied, when we surrendered our ego. A very critical aspect of it that I want to bring up right now is that the first step to surrendering the ego is to listen to understand and not listen to respond. If we can just start with that, we would have made a very, very good progress towards the surrender of our ego. The second principle of Sankhya that we want to focus on, and by the way, this is what we will be talking about right from chapter 3 all the way to chapter 6 for sure, and even after that, is the principle of karma. At this level, the only thing that we wanted to do with Sankhya and karma was the idea of debunking myths around the concept of karma. So we're all familiar and we've all heard of karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. And most often than not, it is told to us that the reason, that the meaning of this shloka is don't bother about the rewards. So only do your karma and action and don't bother about the rewards. That's not how it is. We are human. So inherent in the concept of karma is its consequence. And so therefore, in this case, we would like to bring out the fact that the concept of karma is actually about the goal. It is about the destination. It is about the consequences. But the way to get to the consequence is by focusing not on the goal. Of course, you have the goal in mind, but to focus on the process that gets you to the goal, the steps that get you to the goal, what you need to do in the here and the now. Because whatever you do here in the here and the now will have a consequence. That's how energy operates. That's how karma operates. Every energy spent has a consequence. There's no unwasted iota of energy or quantum of energy anywhere in the universe. So why should it be for human thought or human intellect or human intent or human action? And so therefore it is that we bring to you the idea of karma, just discussed this much in the Sankhya Yoga chapter, of A, having a goal but focusing on the process, B, focusing on the here and the now and the actions thereof, and therefore making sure that whatever you're doing in the absolute here and the now is your best effort. With that said, the third aspect of Sankhya Yoga that we want to talk about, which doesn't really get discussed further except for its consequence, is the whole ladder of fall. This has actually been discussed in the Bhagavad Gita and is usually spoken of in the Mahabharata in the context of Shishupala and the idea of Shishupala Vadha. So these 100 errors that Bhagavan Shri Krishna had forgiven Shishupala for were actually, if you see, in the increasing order of progression of this ladder of fall. The ladder of fall begins with our senses, our observances and our experiences. We love them so much that we then get attached to them. When we get attached to them and we are not fulfilled by them, it leads to anger. Anger, therefore, after that, leads us to anger. Once we are angry, anger leads us to illusion, to Brahma, to visualizing the world as we want to see it, not for its reality. That then distorts our memory and our smriti. And once our memories and our smriti is distorted, our judgment gets completely delusional and biased. And the day that your judgment, your viveka, your sense of rationality gets destroyed, that's when there is absolute and utter destruction. And then as we spoke, that this ladder of fall from experience, from attachment, from desire is also, by the way, a ladder on which you can rise. And the only way to snap the progression of this ladder is to become aware of our emotions and our desires. And really, this is where the Sankhya Yoga is more or less summarized in the context of chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita. The moment we hit chapter 3, which is on Karma Yoga, Bhagavan Shri Krishna has now set the context. He set the space and time context of Arjuna and the battlefields we face. And he set the context of what all am I going to talk to you about. And now begins chapter 1. The first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and especially in the understanding of ourselves, is the Karma Yoga chapter. We've already introduced the idea of karma. We've already introduced the idea of action and consequence. Of every karma will have a karma phala. As we go deeper into karma, there are 3 principles that are established very clearly. And these are very, very important for all of us. The first principle is the inevitability of karma. Karma is, you don't have a choice about it. You can't leave away karma. And how Samir brought it out so beautifully when he said that even when you decide to sit and meditate, there are verbs and actions: sit, meditate. Even if you decide to run away, quit, leave it all, those are verbs of running away, leaving, quitting it all. So we are always incurring karma or expressing it. It's always a karmic transaction. You don't get away from it because you run away from the battlefield. With the inevitability of karma established, it's very important to then understand what is karma, right? Especially because if we are saying that I'm in control of my actions and I control my actions and their consequences, then how do you distinguish that from destiny or bhagya or fate that's beyond you, as we would like to believe, and free will or choice? And here's where we spoke about the kinds of karma there are. So, your body, not this body, but you're actually your soul, not even your body. The reason your soul is occupying this body is because there is a certain set of karmic fulfillment that needs to happen through this body of yours. Samir has very sweetly and very conveniently been using the analogy of an accounting ledger, which works very well. So you had your soul, your Atman, yourself, and we are going to have a more further discussion about it, which is called that, by the way. We don't even have a name for it across our texts. But that expresses itself, or the accumulation of all the karma is called your Sanchita karma. It's that suspense account which holds all of your karmic balance. Then, when you acquire this body that you're living in this lifetime, part of the Sanchita karma gets transmitted or transferred to be set off against this body and this lifetime. This is called your prarabdha. This is what we call in our present lifetimes, in the here and the now, our destiny, our fate, our prarabdha, everything that's happened in the past that has got us still here in this very moment of space and time. That is prarabdha karma. Hereafter, what I do, the karmic transactions that I do now, the actions, the thoughts, the intentions that I have today, is what is going to get set off and become the consequences of the future. This is called agami karma. I choose karmically my prarabdha and why I'm here, what I'm doing here, and this space and time and context. And I have the choice, I have the free will to ensure or to follow through or to create my future karmic ledger, my future karmic PNL. That is my agami karma. Now, if I have that choice, then the logical question is, how should my karma of the future be such that I don't increase my balance and ledger? If karma is inevitable with every breath, every thought, every effort, every action, every emotion, every feeling, then how do I ensure that I don't build up a balance? I'm already carrying a huge ledger which needs to get created, which has already been created and which needs to get balanced. How can I avoid creating a further ledger? And this is where Bhagavan Shri Krishna talks of the concept of Nishkam karma. Nishkam karma happens when you're able to have a karma, the consequence of which is not attached to you. Sounds magical and contrarian. Well, the first step to Nishkam karma is the awareness, is just making sure that we act in awareness. And because a karmic transaction gets initiated every time any energy is spent, it's not only at the level of action that karma gets initiated, but also in our thought, in our emotion, in our feelings, in our ideas. Everything is about the inevitability of karma. So the very first step towards releasing yourself from the cycle of karmic debt and ledger is to ensure that we live in absolute awareness of our thoughts, our words, our actions, and their consequences. And I have thought through and accepted those. This is the first level of understanding ourselves, karma yoga. Figuring out what is it that I accrue, what part is prarabdha, and how can I ensure that the agami karma is nishkam and it doesn't attach to me. And therefore it is that Bhagavan Shri Krishna then steps into chapter 4 of the Bhagavad Gita, which is actually called the Jnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga. Now, literally translated, Jnana Karma Sannyasa is having wisdom that allows you to move beyond action. So, the ability to renounce your action through knowledge. Why this is important is because at this level, Bhagavan Shri Krishna raises our awareness a little further. So while he has asked us just to be aware of our karmic ledgers, consequences, thoughts and actions earlier, now he brings us a little further to say, don't just be aware, but live in heightened consciousness. With this, in the Jnana Yoga, we discussed some concepts. The first of which is the whole idea of stillness. Because karma is inevitable, as we've established earlier, Bhagavan Shri Krishna speaks about the whole idea of action in inaction and inaction in action. And here's where we spoke about the fact that even when you're sitting idle and there's no inaction happening, or no action happening, so you think, there are still thoughts, there are intentions, there are emotions, there are ideas. They are still happening. Be aware and conscious. Beyond aware, conscious about them. Similarly, as I had spoken, because I have a military background, I have always known about how soldiers have been trained to be still in the center of action. So while you could be at war all around you, and that's what Bhagavan Shri Krishna established in the first chapter with Arjuna in the battlefield, you need to be the center. You need to be, remember, the eye of the storm is absolutely calm and absolutely silent and absolutely still. So that's the first aspect, moving from awareness to consciousness. Linked to that, then is the second aspect, which is that while you are there dealing with karma with full awareness and talking about actions and consequences, it's also very important to realize and be fully dedicated and committed to the fact that everything that you do is a yajna. Now, why do we do a yajna? We usually do a yajna because that is our ultimate dedication, focus and center coming together for an ask that we have, material or non-material. Right? When you do a yajna, you pour all of yourself into it. Of course, you put in the yajna samagri, and of course, you put in the ghee and the ahuti and the naivedyam, but you also you offer yourself to it. So, swaha. And then, when a yajna ends, you always end it with idam namma, which means that this that I do, let it be surrendered, let it be given. That's what we need to do in our daily lives. Everything is a yajna. Bhagavan Shri Krishna actually lays out, he actually talks about how pranayam, just the act of breathing and the focus on the breath is a yajna. He talks about how studying, how the act of acquiring knowledge is a yajna. And therefore, this awareness of our actions, thoughts and intentions now needs to become a very conscious dedication. You know, when we started this Bhagavad Gita, our whole journey of Gita on the go and, putting the Bhagavad Gita out there, it's our gift to the world. It's our yajna. For me, when I do the Bhagavad Gita, when I bring this out there from Ekam for the rest of the world to consume, it is my yajna. And that there is no selfish or vested interest in this. The interest is that of putting in my best effort in the here and the now to bring the Bhagavad Gita out, the understanding as best as I can to you. That's the yajna. And so, therefore, the second principle of the Jnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga is that of approaching everything like it was a yajna. And therefore, linked to that is the third aspect, that if you are really going to go on this hard, arduous journey of seeking wisdom, of heightened awareness, of consciousness, and moving your karma and shedding your karmic baggage and understanding who you really are, what you need in this journey is a teacher. You need an enlightened master. Frankly, your text could also be an enlightened master, but then you have to be very master in your own self to be able to decode those. Having an enlightened master show you the way becomes easier. The purpose of the master is somebody who's walked through that journey, who can actually be there for you and validate your experiences. And there are three principles with which we engage with the master. That one is simple. The first one is surrender of the ego. We've discussed that already. The second one is asking the right questions, and we'll come back to that. And the third one is about following instructions. It's like how you learn to play a sport for the first time. The first time that you're playing a sport, you actually just follow the instructions blindly. When your coach tells you, you find yourself a teacher. And whatever your teacher tells you, you do. You do that when you're learning a language, when you're learning a skill, when you're learning driving. You need somebody who knows the language, has been through the journey, knows how to drive. And then you follow instructions blindly. You surrender yourself completely. You follow instructions blindly. And the third and the most important thing, you make sure that you're asking the right questions. But those questions will actually have relevance only when you've done some experience, right? There's no point in asking. Of course, there are theoretical questions. So when you learn to drive, you can ask what the clutch and the brake and the accelerator is. You can look up on manuals about how the engine is and what the chassis is and what the clutch releases. But those will be just clarificatory questions. Like we said, there are three kinds of questions: rhetorical or confirmatory questions, which are Adhamadhikari. Then there are clarificatory or Madhyamadhikari questions, which are either to show off knowledge or seek clarifications. And then there are genuine curiosity, big meaning questions. These are questions that are questions of curiosity, or what are called the Uttamadhikari questions. You will only be able to ask Uttamadhikari questions of genuine curiosity when you have the experience of what your teacher's been telling you, right? So what Bhagwan Sri Krishna has done is that he started with putting us deep into our fears, into our battlefields, into what's happening with us in our daily lives. Then he said, become aware of your emotions, be aware of what's happening in your body, in your mind, in your intellect. Then he pulled us out further in the chapter of Karma Yoga to actually say, okay, now that you're aware, know what's happening, know there'll be consequences. From there, he pulled us out further in the Jnana Karma Sannyasa Yoga to heightened consciousness, heightened awareness, knowledge, wisdom. From there, Bhagwan Sri Krishna pulls us up even one level further up through the Karma Sannyasa Yoga. In the Karma Sannyasa Yoga, literally translated, Karma Sannyasa is the giving up of the action, or the ending of action. Now here's where it gets very strange. All this while we are saying, I am doing the action, I need to be aware of my action, okay, I need to distance myself from the consequences of that action. But here you're telling me that don't have action only, matlab, how does that work? And this is where Bhagwan Sri Krishna says, if you really want to be evolved, not from owning to your action, from owning to what's happening in your body, mind and intellect, you own your action. From your action, you move up and you become conscious and shed the consequences of that action. Idam namama, the actions don't accrue to me. The consequences don't accrue to me. From there, you lift up even level further to say, my actions also don't accrue to me. And therefore, as a part of the Karma Sannyasa Yoga, the three concepts that we discussed, the first one is, how do you become this person who doesn't own their action? How do you say, I am not the doer? The action is happening, it's happening out there, but I am not doing it. I am just the via medium, I am the nimitta matra. And it requires a very high degree of evolution, because then I am also surrendering. If I'm surrendering my right to be the doer, the karta, then I'm also surrendering my right to gain from the fruits of that action, from that karma. So I'm also surrendering my right to be the bhokta. And that's the level to which we now reach. In order to be able to do this, I also need to make sure that I have no sense, how do I distance myself from the consequence of the action? In order to distance myself from the consequence of the action, I have to distance myself from the concept of judgment. Because then it is just action and consequence. There is no good, bad, right, wrong, sin, virtue, papa, punya. Nothing is attached to that action. And I need to let go of my judgment. Much easier said than done, because everything in our surface existence is screaming for fulfillment, is screaming for the consequences and not the actions in themselves. In fact, we never have actions in ourselves unless we are sure of the consequences. And therefore, The one most fabulous way of distancing ourselves from that sense of judgment, and therefore from our action, and therefore from the need to do the action, to need to be the doer, is actually setting in our mind the space of, or the principle of, the source of pain and pleasure. Understanding, following through, and imbibing the principle that anything which gives us pleasure today will give me pain later. The analogy that Samir uses is always very wonderful on this, which is that today I might derive pleasure from eating rasgullas, tomorrow they will cause me diabetes. And similarly, anything which gives me pain today will give me pleasure later. So today I might hate the idea of running or having boiled karela, but both those will give me a healthier body. So irrespective of whether it is pleasure and pain, or whether it is pain and pleasure, these are cycles. It's the same source. Our attachments, and here's where I go back to the ladder of fall, our attachments, our desires, this is the source of pleasure today and pain tomorrow, or pain today and pleasure tomorrow. If we can distance ourselves from these, we know that we can then step into that space of Sat, Chit and Anand. Sat is just the existence. Chit is consciousness. And Anand is bliss. That's all that we need to be in the space of. When we reach there, then we are no longer attached to our karma, not attached to its phala, therefore the karma is not attached to us. And I reach a stage where I've ended my action and the cycle of karma and karma phala here and now already. Now, the question then arises that all this sounds beautiful and wonderful in theory and principle. And this has always been my conversation with Samir about saying that, yeah, it sounds good, but how does it become applicable? How do I make it come alive? And how do I apply this? How do I practice this? And that's where chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita, which is Dhyana Yoga, which is the science of meditation, that comes into play. Dhyana Yoga is about training the mind, about becoming the person that you want to be, about the ability to step into your own self beyond your karma and karma phala, and focusing on absolute internal awareness of the dhyana. For the Dhyana Yoga, there are 3 principles. The first one of which is, I alone am my friend and my enemy. My universe needs to reside within me. I may have an enlightened teacher, we spoke about him earlier, but my teacher is still at a distance. My only job is to learn from him. But I am responsible for my own pain, my own pleasure, my own karma, my own phala. All this is happening inside of me, and therefore the solutions to this, the sannyasa from this, the riding beyond these cycles is also going to happen from within me. That's the first principle of the Jnana Yoga. And here it's important that we learn to control the mind there. In order to step into my own self and become the Dhyana Yogi, I need to follow the principles of Sadhana Chatushtya. Sadhana Chatushtya is the 4 characteristics I must have inside of me. Vivek, judgment or discretion. Vairagya, detachment, which is what we've spoken of in all the previous chapters. Shata Sampatti. Shata Sampatti is qualities that I must have within myself. And Mumukshatva, the desire to gain freedom. And this is where Bhagavan Shri Krishna brings it back to Arjuna to say, are you ready for this? You followed most of these principles, but are you now ready to become the Dhyana Yogi? And then in order to become the Dhyana Yogi, once I have contained my universe within myself, once I've become empowered and I have risen above desire, above kamya, to actually want to shed the karmic baggage. Everyone doesn't have to do it. We don't need to do it. But if you want to do it, these are the processes to follow. You don't want to do it, you carry on. You carry on in that eternal cycle of birth and death, and that's fine. There's no judgment there either. But should you want to step into your own self and rise above this, then the second step of the Dhyana Yogi is obviously the practice of meditation. And this is where Bhagavan Shri Krishna makes it like absolutely so practical that he tells you literally, there are 12 shlokas that literally tell you how do you meditate at best. So don't sit too low, don't sit too high, don't do it when you're too full, don't do it when you're fasting, don't do it when you're too sleepy, don't do it when you're very alert, etc. etc. What's the time of the day, when to do it. And he actually enumerates it out for you to make it very easy for you about when is your dhyana going to give you the greatest joy and the results from it. So that being said, and in fact the two things that Samir brought out here that were very interesting is how the West very often misunderstands these terms. In meditation, when they say you focus on the tip of your nose, and I go back to the ladder of fall conversation, the ladder works two ways. We choose to focus on fall, but the ladder also rises. Similarly, tip of the nose has two tips. Right? We love to show our yogis sitting cross-eyed focusing on this tip, but it's actually not this tip. The tip they're talking about is your pineal gland. It's the center of your eyebrow. By the way, that is the other tip of the nose, the other end of the nose, which is where it connects with the rest of your mind. And that's where the pineal gland is located. So focus on that beautiful space at the center of your brows. And the other one that Samir wanted to bring up or to bring into conversation was the idea of being a brahmachari. Now, a brahmachari is not a celibate, but the fact that a brahmachari is somebody who follows the acharan, the way of the Brahma, the Brahmana, right? So it's about the path you follow and not about celibacy at all. That having done, so when you aspire to become a Jnana Yogi, the first one is establishing yourself within your own self, knowing that you will find the solutions also within you and that the source of all this conflict is also within you. The second step of it is the whole idea of dhyana. How do you meditate? How do you become aware? How do you drive this consciousness within your own self? And then therefore the third aspect, as I kept asking, sounds good. Everything that we've spoken of in this journey of karma yoga, of jnana karma sannyasa yoga, of karma sannyasa yoga, the ending of action itself, sounds very good, but really how practical is it? To which, and then apparently this is also what Arjun asked Bhagavan Shri Krishna himself. And so therefore Bhagavan Shri Krishna replies, dude, no easy way out. You just have to practice. Abhyasa. And then as we realize that this needs to be done, again, I come back to my military background on this, right? I used to often wonder why soldiers would spend their peacetime postings in rifle parades and cleaning up the weapons and shooting ranges and shooting practice and target practice and all the war games. And then my father told me that beta, we do this practice in peacetime so that we are better prepared for war. And that's exactly what this is, right? This is daily practice. We know this, whether we have to, whether we know you need to to build muscle. You can't just go to the gym one day, do 50 and 100 reps and say, okay, I am going to have the muscle. It just needs constant practice. And that's exactly what Bhagavan Shri Krishna says to Arjun at the end of chapter 6 of Dhyana Yoga, of saying that Arjun, you need to just practice it every day. And so I'm going to build this back to us in the context of this shift from Koham to Soham. We have spoken of concepts, we've spoken of frameworks, we've spoken of stories, we've spoken of them in the context of Bhagavan Shri Krishna and Arjuna. But if I had to layer this out for you or put a context around it, I see this as two sets of learnings or three sets of learnings. The first level of learning is about my own relationship with myself. The fact that I am in control of my destiny, my fate, my karma, and the fact that the battlefield, the fears, the temptations, the desire, the anger, everything exists inside of me. In fact, there's this wonderful 7 Tehutian principles, which are the laws of the universe, the equivalent of Rita in African mythology, in African wisdom scriptures. And they talk about how the universe, the principles of the universe, the first principle is the principle of mentalism. Everything in the universe is in the mind. What's in the mind is the universe. Physics is discovering this with all their latest, the witness principle, the observer principle is what physics is discovering today as we try to explain quantum entanglement. And we've come down to the witness and the observer principle. So that's the first thing to be learned. The second thing is that in this engagement with my own self, I just have to work through layers of awareness. It's like an onion. I need to be engaged only with myself to start with. And in that engagement with my own self, I need to slowly uncover the layers. I need to live in the awareness of my fears, my insecurity, what's happening in my body, the mind and the intellect complex. From there, I move on to the awareness of my intentions, the awareness of my emotions, the awareness of my desires in Karma Yoga. From there, I move into the consciousness principles of how do I do this in Yagya? How do I approach my life? How can I make my life absolutely dedicated and complete in its surrender? How can I distance myself from the phala of my karma by making it selfless, nishkama karma? And then from there, I move into the whole idea of shedding my doership. I'm just a vassal. I'm just a vassal for the universe to deliver through me. I hold nothing back for myself. There is no selfishness. There is no vested interests. And then I concentrate on my own self with the dhyana yoga. I go deeper and deeper and deeper and uncover layers of my own self till I have become one with the Brahman. That's the second thing that I have learned from here. And so the first is that the universe is mental. Everything is just here. The second is the process of becoming my higher, best, brilliantest version of my own self. And then at the third level is repeated practice. Why I find it so fascinating is how in neuroplasticity itself, the process of setting up new neural pathways is the 3-step process of awareness, focused attention, and repeated iteration. When we discuss, and we will be discussing further as we go around the Bhagavad Gita, the process of manifestation of anything that you want to manifest, the meditative process is the 3-step process of intention, attention, and manifestation. In fact, even the neural plasticity, the neural pathway process, as is explained in our Upanishads, is the process of Ichcha, Jnana, and Kriya. And those are the 3 processes that I have taken away from chapter 1 to chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita in the Sekam series of the Gita on the Go. And I hope you enjoy your journey with us and find your fulfillment, your own self, your best, brightest, highest version. And you find your resonance on the Ekam series of Gita on the Go. Namaskar.
Na 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 na